Tony. Thank you so much for joining us on the future of work. So Criterion has launched this series where we are interviewing key thought leaders in the industry, and we are so happy to have you with us today. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I would love to let you introduce yourself. I understand that you're the Vice President of Human Resources at Flintco. You're responsible for the people part of Flintco, and you have lots of experience doing this. So could you tell us a little bit about what your everyday is like and what exactly you do?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me. Excited to share, some of my experiences and I won't say insight, but my opinions on some of the things and topics that you guys are looking to cover. My background, studied engineering and then went into the Army, did 5 years active duty, came out and went to work in the construction industry. And after starting out in the field, I moved into HR about a year in, and spent about 12 years with an international construction firm called Skanska. And then about 3 years ago, I made the move over to be the head of HR for Flintco. And my day-to-day is employee relations, talent management, staffing and recruiting, comp and benefits. So if it touches or has an impact on our culture, I take a great interest in it and have the responsibility of looking after it.
So today we're going to focus on learning, and we wanted to ask you a couple of questions in that regard, and we're hoping that you could share your insights and expertise with us. So it's currently I think that it would be great to just touch upon the current landscape. Like right now, are a lot of people working remotely? Like what is the current situation, and what is your implication in people, with the current situation of the pandemic, of people, how do you keep them motivated would be a great place to start in this situation, actually.
Yeah, I think, the pandemic and working remotely has really shifted kind of what the workplace looks like. Even for, you think about how the workplace is shifting for tech companies or service companies, working for a construction company, sometimes that limits how virtual we can be with our workforce and our workplace. But even leading up to the COVID pandemic, some of the shifts that we were seeing or we were trying to push, and I think you're seeing it in some of the other industries with other leading individuals. Number one is I like the fact that you reference it as learning. It's a learning and development function now, not so much the training function, which I think takes in a more holistic view of the space. Training, in my mind, is kind of check the box, kind of required technical, very much one directional type of activities. Learning and development is a bit more holistic. Yeah, it's going to touch on some technical training, but it's also going to touch on development. It's going to touch on soft skills. And leading up to the pandemic, the shift has been less of this one direction viewpoint of the space to more of a two-way conversation about what it is you want to do and how you want to get there. So leading up to and getting even more accelerated during the pandemic, we at Flintco have been starting to shift the discussion around here's training, here's what we're going to require you to do, and more of, hey, here's some options that you have, but you ultimately own your career path. And so it's giving more ownership, asking employees to take more ownership rather than driving, again, the one-way conversation. These are the requirements that you have to do your job or to move up in your career path. And so, with that happening, while we're trying to have our employees take more ownership, it starts with our managers being as proactive as they can, and not just the review process and the talent management process, but also helping them think a little bit more future forward, future thinking about their career path and having more conversations. So it's a long-winded answer of saying that, we've really tried to shift it more towards learning and development and being a two-way conversation than just a one-directional training objective. And we've really tried to implement and shift the thinking around our employees that they own their training and development, their learning and development, and they need to take ownership of it.
And do you find that there are ways that work in order to push people? You're talking about self-development and making it a two-way conversation and a two-way effort. And do you find that there are some tactics that work very effectively that you could share with us that really motivates people to want to self-develop?
Yeah, yeah. So two things that I think that have been helpful for at least for us. Number one is we do assess everybody, and so for us, the learning and development journey kind of starts with creating some self-awareness on who you are, what your strengths are, maybe some things that you might want to have an opportunity to work on. And so doing an assessment, which when I joined the company 3 years ago, we assess everybody, and that's just not something that I'm accustomed to. But investing the money, investing the time of a third party and now an internal consultant that we use to do a deep dive into the data helps kind of set the table of helping people understand who they are and maybe some things that they would want to improve on. So it's equipping them to be a little bit more self-aware, number one, through the assessment process. And number two, we've redefined our talent management process to be less about ratings and more about, again, this holistic view of why it is you do what you do. So, Simon Sinek does the, find your why. And that's kind of the principle that we've built this around. And it helps people find, again, maybe I want to be the VP of HR in a company, or maybe I just want to be a project manager, or I want to get into learning and development or safety. And those things are going to be driven not just by your professional interests, but also your personal interests. So the second thing that we've kind of done is moved, again, this holistic view on what's important to you, both personally and professionally, and help guide a conversation that will probably lead to things that they want to focus on, not just within learning and training, but again, development activities and hopefully career path.
And are there some best practice guidelines that you could share with us? I mean, that's a great that's a great context that we have, an understanding of the, the larger approach. But it would be great if you could share some actual best practices that we could take as, key guidelines for this sort of exercise.
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind, again, number one, our performance management system is tied into our learning function here. And so we shifted away, again, from going into a rating system and going into basically one annual review.
Okay.
And so we pushed it into, and we created a, basically it's like a map, but it's based off of a concept called a UMAP, which there is a company out there that does it. Ours is a variation of it. And basically what it is it helps guide conversations between you and your manager. And again, some of those conversations are driven on professional goals, professional experiences, but they're also pushed on some of the personal parts. For example, is finding your why. And some people may be driven by being the best engineer that they can, or some people may be more driven by having travel and mobility experiences, or maybe driven by family interactions. And so having conversations or helping try to have and facilitate conversations with their managers helps kind of drive that holistical approach to what your why is about. And so that's one thing that we've done with this, we call it My Navigator concept. The other thing that it tries to push, and I think a lot of companies are going this route, is really trying to drive more towards not just annual or biannual review process, but driving more regular conversations, more coaching conversations. And so we've asked our managers and our employees to take ownership and try to have at least 4 waypoint conversations. There's this whole map and guide type of nomenclature that we use for My Navigator. So a waypoint conversation is what we try to have more of. And again, it's to help kind of guide and create relationships so you can have conversations, not just on how work is going, but how your personal life is going, that may be guiding or helping you lean towards different development activities or training activities.
When you look around in the industry, are there any active other companies that you would consider are very active and innovative that you might take, inspiration from, or you might like to comment on that we could also learn from?
Yeah, I think actually being in the military before, the Army is actually, U.S. Army is actually doing something similar. for professional development. They're doing self-assessments. They're almost like 360s now, which is, there's a stereotype, I think, with the government or the military that they're kind of slow moving and not usually on the cutting edge of innovation. But they have implemented this process recently where there is a self-assessment, and you kind of go through and figure out, again, not necessarily what it is you want to be when you grow up, but at least kind of where you see or you'd like to see your career go. And based on those assessments, based on that feedback, it's going to help drive where you go for professional development. And so, again, I think this whole principle or this whole idea is centered around giving employees or giving individuals ownership of their career paths. And the exciting thing about that is that obviously everybody chooses a different path to get wherever they go, even though you may end up at the same level of an organization or a similar title in a company. The path that we all choose to take there could be different. And so not narrowing it or limiting what it is you have to do to kind of get to that professional goal and giving more ownership, I think, is kind of an exciting way to change how we view and how we attack the development space for our employees.
And speaking of, we're very heavily reliant right now on technology because of the situation. Would you find that there are some technical solutions that are extremely helpful right now? And why are they so helpful?
Well, I think number one, again, obviously there are, some of the easy answers, but I've seen them start to be a little bit more embraced recently, is virtual reality. There's a lot of opportunities to have people test out or at least demonstrate, especially in the trades for construction, that, hey, you know how to pour concrete, or there's an electrical contractor called Pike Electric. So they'll bring in people to be a wireman or a wire person. So rather than putting them up at a high height, wrangling with high voltage wires to see if they know what they say they know, they can do it in a virtual reality setting and test out, so to speak. So obviously it reduces a lot of the safety risks, but it also speeds up the process because then you're able to bring people in and test them or cycle them out a lot quicker. But the other thing that I think overlooked sometimes is just the mobile capabilities of a lot of these training sessions, or like what you and I are doing here with Zoom meetings. Again, everybody is a lot more isolated this past year due to COVID. So things that can bring people together face to face, even though it may be virtual, is a huge step in being able to kind of bring that connectivity, that human interaction that a lot of us have been missing this past year. And everybody's on their devices. So, in the past, it was great if you could do a WebEx, but now, I could have done this. I did it yesterday on my cell phone. So you can interact on your cell phone, your iPad, which makes, the accessibility for all of these opportunities that much more impactful, because now you're not limited by, necessarily a T1 connection or a broadband connection. If you have your phone, you could be getting your master's degree in the middle of nowhere.
And do you find that there are some technical solutions as well that really help to, again, as we were talking about people self-motivating themselves being so important right now, are there some technical solutions that you find are very helpful in that respect as well that we could touch upon?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't seen anything specific. I think, that's one of the challenges we've noticed in this shift to remote work, is that in the past, when you're in the office, there's obviously a lot more touch points with your manager. There's a lot more connectivity. There's a lot more visibility. And when you're not in the same location with your manager, a lot of times, I think individuals are missing out on development opportunities because they're not there. So I think, in terms of technology, this helps a little bit, but I think if there was something that was able to, not be like Big Brother and watch you while you're at your home working, but, maintain that personal close connection that we have with a lot of our coworkers and managers. I think those types of platforms, those types of tools help facilitate that, despite being, remote or kind of isolated from everybody else.
And is there anything else that you could share with us, in terms of just work culture and, some, it doesn't necessarily have to be to do with the current situation, but if there's something that you feel like you could impart with us, in addition to the questions that I asked, touching on the topic of learning, which I understand you're very passionate about, is there anything that you would like to share with us in that sense?
Well, I think, again, just reflecting on the last year, when especially for an industry like construction, where it's like you have to be on site, you have to be in person. The thing that I've been excited about is that we've been able to maintain a high level of production and effectiveness, despite the fact that we've had to alter not just our staffing arrangements, but also working remotely. And so for a very traditional industry like ours, getting comfortable with alternate work arrangements, I think is a huge stepping stone for, reducing the potential for burnout. I think people have reached that limit by trying to put in so many hours commuting long distances. This kind of helps reduce that and kind of break down that negative stereotype that you can't work from home and be productive. So I think that has been a benefit. I think, though, in terms of things that we want to change going forward, I think as managers, there's going to be this requirement to be better listeners. I think that's kind of a cheesy way to say it, but I think if we want employees to take ownership of their careers, if we want to trust employees to continue to work remotely, and not feel isolated, we really have to be, as managers, much more proactive in trying to engage employees. And it's not just about what they want to do for development. It's about how they're going to perform, making sure they feel like part of the culture and part of the company. And when we're having more regular conversations about their career path, again, it's not going to be the same career path that got me or you or whoever to where they are in their career. It's going to be trying to understand and guide and coach wherever it is they're in their career path and what it is they're looking to attain or achieve. So being a better listener and thinking more in terms of coaching our employees, I think is going to be a shift to kind of help us cement this change in the workplace that is more remote and more virtual.
And in terms of productivity levels, like you said something before that got me thinking, that you were saying, you're working from home. It never really had the best reputation as keeping people very motivated to, be efficient and be as productive as possible. Have you learned in the experience that we've lived in the past year, any best practices that you could share with us that could help employees to stay productive, even in a home environment, even if they have, their children at home with them? Or is there some advice that you could give us in that respect? Because everybody's
I wouldn't say I've got anything, earth shattering, but it's scheduling. It's almost like when you were in college and you had office hours with your professor. We've encouraged our managers to have, dedicated times where they catch up and check in with their employees, and at a minimum through phone, but at best through Zoom, or, we've got instant messaging platforms, like I'm sure a lot of people do. So it's constant check-in, again, that connectivity mode. And then working remotely, a couple of things. We put together some training for our employees to kind of get comfortable with the idea, but also to share some best practices, some of which were, hey, try not to work from the dining room table. Find a quiet space, find a place where you can kind of focus on what it is you need to do, take calls. And we know your kids may be home, especially with schools closed and whatnot, but try to find some space that can be your office away from the office. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of helps you kind of get in that mindset. The other thing too, is we've asked people to take breaks. More often than not, when people are working remotely, they're like, oh, great, you got work-life balance, you can do what you do, but you end up kind of consuming yourself more in your work and not taking time to go for a walk or, take a break and kind of just reset your mind. So we've encouraged people to take some of those mental breaks or physical breaks where you can kind of walk away and kind of recharge yourself. And then the last thing is, I think, at least from our perspective, we have been productive while we've been working remote, and it's recognizing that, because I think, again, too often, a lot of traditional managers, if I can't see you, then I don't think you're being productive. And, the last year, at least for us, has proved that that's not the case. Like, we can do our jobs, the majority of our jobs, and not have to be within, arm's length of our managers. And so letting them recognize that, I think, kind of help build that trust and that comfort level with continuing to do this going forward.
So I just have a final question for you. What would your advice be to HR leaders starting a new role in 2021?
My advice to anyone joining HR, whether you're a new grad or somebody switching, like a lot of times HR professionals might switch industries. It's an old adage, but it is truer more than you can say it, is that you just got to learn the business. I mean, HR is only effective if we understand what our operations is, what they're about, what they need, and how we produce or make money. So learn the business, learn the business, learn the business is always the best step, whether you're a new HR professional in a different industry, or you're coming out of college, or you're making a career transition into HR. Learn the business. The better you know the business, the better and more helpful and more value add you are going to be the organization.
Well, thank you so much. We've learned a lot with you today, and it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thanks, Erica.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It was good.